Welcome to the Balanced Badass Podcast, the show for multitaskers determined to stay balanced and badass without losing their minds. Every week, we help you manage your overflowing calendar and household, making sure you still have time to breathe, laugh, and savor that much-needed glass of wine at the end of the day. Think of this podcast as your weekly dose of practical advice, humor, and tough love, just like catching up with a friend who really gets it. I'm Tara Kermit, your personal growth coach, helping you handle how was your day without a meltdown. Now let's get into today's episode. So here's a question for you. When's the last time you made a decision at work without needing 5 people to sign off on it? Or here's another one. How many times this week have you had to give someone an update on something that they probably didn't even need to know about? I'm talking about those little status updates on things you've totally got handled, but for some reason, you still have to check in about. That right there, my friend, is a sign you might be missing a little something called autonomy at work. And today, we're going to dig into why autonomy isn't just a nice to have, but is actually essential. And trust me, I know all about this from my days working in higher ed. The layers of approvals, the committees for committees, the endless policies that make even the simplest task feel like you're trudging through mud. It's the very definition of red tape, and I didn't like it. We're talking about practically needing to loop in a committee for every paperclip purchase. And heaven forbid you need a second one, you might actually need another round of approvals. By the time you got the okay to do anything, the motivation to actually do it was long gone. Listen, autonomy at work isn't just about being able to make a few decisions or having control over where you put your stapler. It's actually one of the biggest factors in whether you're motivated or headed straight for burnout. So today, we're going to get real about autonomy, why it's so damn important, and how the lack of it turns us into those miserable clock-watching zombies. So grab a drink, settle in, and let's get into why feeling like a passenger in your own job is a surefire way to burnout. Okay, so autonomy. Let's break it down in plain terms. Autonomy is basically the freedom to do your job without somebody hovering over you, second-guessing every decision, and micromanaging you to the point of insanity. It's trust, plain and simple. When you have autonomy, it means that your boss or your team believes that you're actually capable of handling things. It's the ability to make decisions, get creative, and actually own what you're doing. It's trusting yourself to get things done and knowing that your boss or manager trusts you to do it too. Autonomy is what actually gives meaning to what you're doing every day. But unfortunately, in so many places, autonomy is treated like a nice to have rather than an absolute must. You might feel more like you're following orders than actually doing anything that feels like yours. And that's the problem. When all you're doing is checking boxes handed down by someone else, it's not long before your energy, your drive, and your mental health start taking a hit. And that's ridiculous. Because autonomy isn't some perk you get to enjoy when you're employee of the month. It's what keeps you from feeling like a freaking robot. I mean, let me ask you this. Do you feel excited to show up to a job where you're only following orders with no room to make decisions? Of course not. No one does. We're human. We need a sense of control, a sense of ownership over what we do. Autonomy gives you ownership over what you're doing. It lets you use your brain, bring in your creativity, and actually make a difference. When you don't have that, you're basically stuck following a to-do list someone else handed you, and honestly, what's motivating about that? But let me be clear here. Autonomy isn't about throwing structure out the window or doing whatever you want. It's about having enough space to work in a way that feels natural, meaningful, and honestly, a little bit fun. Now, let me throw out a few scenarios, and you tell me if they sound familiar. I'll bet one of these hits close to home. So, scenario number 1. You're constantly waiting on approvals. Like even to send an email, you're double checking with somebody else. You're trying to make things happen, but every decision has to be run up the ladder for a stamp of approval from folks who probably haven't touched your project in months. Or you've got scenario 2. You've got a boss who's always checking in. Like, always. Every tiny detail needs a status update, and it's not even about deadlines or quality anymore. It's really about control. They need to know what you're doing every second of every day to the point where you feel like you're back in high school asking for a hall pass to go to the bathroom. And then there's scenario 3. Your job is so scripted that if you had a cardboard cutout at your desk, no one would probably even notice. Every task, every project is pre planned to the point where your only job is to follow the instructions. If you're nodding along, then yeah, you're probably low on autonomy. And the worst part, you may not even realize how draining it is because you're just surviving. But that lack of autonomy eats away at you. When there's no autonomy, every decision feels like a debate. Everything has to go through the chain. And what happens then? You end up waiting around for approvals and updates, getting pulled into status meetings that suck up more time than they're worth. And my personal favorite, you spend more time telling people what you're about to do than actually doing it. I hear this all the time. People feel like their jobs are basically just them waiting for permission to do their jobs. And it's exhausting. I know what it's like to feel passionate about your work, but have that passion slowly chipped away by endless red tape. In higher ed, it's so easy to start with the best of intentions and big ideas, only to find yourself stuck in a system that's more focused on process than progress. I remember watching amazing, dedicated colleagues feel like their hands were tied by all the red tape. They were just so bogged down by structure that any real innovation or excitement started to feel impossible. I mean, let's imagine this. Every single decision you make at work requires a quick sign off from someone else. Sending an email? You better check with your boss first. Got an idea for how to speed up a process? Let's run it by 3 levels of management. Hell, want to switch where the stapler goes? That'll need a committee. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's what lack of autonomy looks like. See, when you're waiting for approval all the time, you lose momentum. You lose confidence too. You start thinking maybe they don't trust me, or maybe I'm not good enough to make these decisions. And before you know it, you're mentally checked out. You're there physically, but you're not really there, you know? It's like you're running on autopilot, just doing what you're told to avoid rocking the boat. And let me tell you, autopilot doesn't fuel anybody's drive for too long. When you have zero say in what you're doing, it's more than just annoying. It's like your brain is saying, why should I even care? You lose that connection to work. You're just following someone else's script, right? And that's a mental drain because humans, believe it or not, actually need a sense of control. It's really part of what keeps us motivated. When we don't get that, here's what happens. We start checking out mentally. We lose that spark. The enthusiasm that we had for the job, gone. And soon, every day just feels like we're showing up, putting in the hours, and leaving. Rinse and repeat. If you've ever felt that way, let me tell you, you're probably not overworked. You're under autonomied. Yeah, I just made that up, but you get the point. Without autonomy, work loses its meaning. Now, I want to talk about a few of these autonomy killers specifically because they're everywhere. First up, micromanagement. You know that boss who needs updates every 5 minutes like it's a crime if they're not CC'd on every email? Micromanagement screams, I don't trust you. And guess what happens when someone doesn't trust you? You start doubting yourself and you don't trust yourself. Suddenly you're asking yourself, wait, do I know how to do this? When you absolutely do. Then there's red tape and bureaucracy. The hoops you have to jump through just to get something small done. Have you ever worked somewhere that required 5 different approvals to order office supplies? It's absurd. And all those hoops kill any momentum. Instead of making progress, you're chasing sign-offs, and by the time you get them, your motivation's in the gutter. So what do you do if you're in one of those roles that's more do as you're told than run with it? Let's be real, not everyone can walk into the boss's office and demand complete control. But there are little ways to start taking back some autonomy. First, set some boundaries. If you're dealing with a micromanager, take control of how you update them. Instead of getting constant check-ins, offer to send a weekly or bi-weekly update with everything they need to know. This way, you're showing them that you're on top of it, but on your terms. It sounds simple, but it can make a huge difference in how often you're interrupted. Second, ask to own a specific task or project. Even if it's a small one, having something that you can take full control of can boost your motivation like you wouldn't believe. Maybe you can't take over the whole department, but maybe there is a task or project that you could run solo. Frame it as a win-win. You get to show what you can do, and your boss has one less thing to worry about. And third, find small ways to make the work feel like yours. I get it. Not every job has a ton of flexibility, but look for little tweaks that you can make to your process, your workspace, or your approach that give you a sense of ownership. Even in the most rigid roles, there's usually something that you can do your way. Trust me, every bit of control you add does make a difference. Now, if you're a leader or manager tuning in, I'm talking to you too, because creating a culture of autonomy isn't just for employees, it's also on the people running the show. If you want to keep your team engaged and avoid burnout, start with autonomy. Give people room to make decisions. Don't make every tiny task a group activity, and trust your team to do their jobs and give them space to run with ideas. Autonomy doesn't mean no oversight, but it does mean trusting people to do the work without having to monitor their every freaking move. When you give people the space to own their projects, make decisions, and use their strengths, productivity skyrockets. Because here's the not-so-secret secret. People work best when they feel like their work actually matters. If you want a motivated, engaged team, it's time to start giving them some freedom. Cut down on unnecessary check-ins, let people lead where they can, and watch how they step up when they're actually trusted to do their damn jobs. People don't leave jobs where they feel trusted. They leave jobs where they feel controlled, monitored, and stifled. All right, so let's wrap this up. Autonomy isn't a perk. It's essential for engagement, motivation, and avoiding burnout. If you're feeling drained, ask yourself, do you have a say in what you're doing, or are you just following orders? If it's the latter, think about where you can take back a bit of control. Advocate for yourself, even in small ways, and remember that you deserve to have ownership over your work. So here's my challenge for you. Find one tiny area in your work this week where you can make a change, one thing that you can control. Maybe it's one task you can own from start to finish, or one process that you can tweak just a little bit. It doesn't have to be huge, just a small change that's yours. Because taking back that little bit of autonomy is a step toward making your job feel like yours again. And as always, thanks for tuning in. If this hit home for you, let me know. Drop a comment or send me a DM on Instagram to share your own experiences with autonomy at work. If you're ready to create a career that you actually want to show up for, stick around, because we're just getting started, friend. At the end of the day, you deserve more than just clocking in. You deserve to feel like your work has purpose, and autonomy is where that starts. Thanks for hanging out with me on the Balanced Badass podcast. I hope today's episode brought you a little more balance and a lot more badass in your day. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave a review. Your support helps more multitaskers like you find the show, and I'd really appreciate it. Until next time, take care of yourself and make good choices, friend. I'll catch you next week.